The views and opinions expressed in this recording do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Logan City Council. Logan City Council does not make any representation of the accuracy of any such views and opinions.
Welcome to this podcast, one of a number on the Logan City Council Library's website, recorded in front of a live audience. Today's conversation is a special Brisbane Writers Festival Logan event. It gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome Tala Raassi.
Thank you.
Reviewers of Tala's book have recommended it as a rare book equally likely to appeal to fans of Project Runway, students of contemporary Middle Eastern history, and for all people seeking inspiration in starting a business. The tagline to Tala's book is How a Girl from Tehran Broke the Rules to Change Her World. In 2012, Tala was named one of the most fearless women in the world by Newsweek magazine. Tala is an Iranian-American fashion designer whose vision is to celebrate a woman's choice to wear whatever she wishes without the fear of being judged or punished. Tala is a successful fashion designer with 2 clothing lines. Her Darbidar swimwear line went on to feature in the 2010 Miss Universe pageant. Tala's journey as a businesswoman is inspiring, but behind every great success story, as we know, there's an even greater backstory. And tonight we're going to explore that story. Welcome, Tala.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tala, before we get really into your story as such, the descriptions of Iran in your book are absolutely beautiful. And growing up in Tehran and the places that your family went for your holidays, can you describe to the audiences some of these special places that are in your book?
Absolutely. So actually one of the reasons that I really wanted to write Fashion is Freedom, because when I first moved to the United States, I would watch the news channels and be like, that's not the Iran that I know. Like, I don't even know where these places are. So it was very important for me to talk about the beauty of my country, because often you hear the bad things and there's so much more than what it's projected in the media. So I grew up in Tehran, in the suburbs of Shemran, which is a kind of a wealthier suburbs of Iran where a lot of the embassies are. It's where the Shah of Iran lived. And in the weekends, we used to go to this garden that my parents had that was bought for them by their parents. They called the Rose Garden, which is an hour away from Tehran. And one thing people don't know or often don't think about is that Tehran has 4 seasons. So we also have an amazing skiing town, which a lot of people think that, you know, we live in a desert, but we do have amazing different seasons. Another beautiful place would be the Caspian Sea, which we call the Shomal, where you go by the beach. It is quite different now than it was before the revolution, where you would see beautiful Iranian women in their bathing suits, but it's still a very beautiful scenery. So it has so many different seasons, so many different backdrops. It's naturally a very beautiful country.
How many people live in Iran?
About 74 million people now, and I think about 70% of that is also under the age of 36. So it's
really
a very
young.
young population, yes.
Now, something that people may not realise is that you weren't actually born in Iran.
I was not. When my brother was 3 years old, he had to do an open heart surgery. So my parents decided to have the surgery done in the United States. So my mom was pregnant with me at the time. So I was born in the States and held a U.S. passport. But because of my father's business, we moved back to Iran when I was 2 years old. And then I grew up there until I was almost 18.
Were there any early indications that you were going to have this incredible career in fashion?
You know, growing up in Iran as a young woman, there are no mainstream boutiques, and women in the streets are covered. And you don't, schools only prepare you for more traditional careers like, becoming a lawyer or a doctor. And of course, in a traditional Iranian family like mine, if you're not a rocket scientist or a doctor or a lawyer, they don't consider it much of an education. So my parents really wanted me to pursue a law degree. But I started becoming really fascinated by different fabrics. So when I was 8 years old, my mother had this mink coat that was in a storage room for years, and she never wore it. And at the time, I didn't know the reason why she wasn't wearing it. So I just thought it was a piece of garment that was in the storage room. So one day when she wasn't home, I decided to cut about 8 inches off the bottom of this coat. And I had a Barbie that they had brought, a family member had brought for me from California. I was like a Malibu Barbie, blonde hair, and had a pink swimsuit. So I made her a very ill-fitted fur coat. And I was so excited to show my mom. And of course, she did not at all appreciate that creation. So I was definitely punished for that. And then a few months after that, I cut the bottom of my father's leather chair, and I thought that he wouldn't see it on the side because I had seen a leather skirt in a magazine, in one of my mom's illegal fashion magazines at the time, and I wanted to create that leather skirt for my Barbie. So I was again caught. But I think all of these creations were just kind of pouring out of me. I just didn't know what I could do with it. I was kind of convinced that I was going to become a lawyer and go to law school, and didn't really know what I was going to do with it at that time.
But at the same time, you describe how beautiful women are in Iran and how they're really interested in fashion and beauty, and they absolutely love their parties. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Iran is a completely different Iran than what people know today, and it makes me sad because, a certain generation may know Iran from the old government, but the next generation is only going to know Iran from what they hear in the media. And unfortunately, a lot of these kids don't get to go travel, but behind closed doors, it's same thing that people do in the West. So I would watch my mom and her friends go to these all-woman hair salons, and when they enter these hair salons, they actually look like they're about to go to the party, hair and makeup all done, but they're coming to get their hair and makeup done. But it's like a scene. So they would come with their hijab and then take their hijabs off, and everyone's super glamorous with all their jewelry and their fashionable clothing, and they would sit and drink coffee and smoke their cigarettes and gossip and talk about politics and jokes and stuff. So I used to watch my mom and her friends and how glamorous they were all the time. And then every Thursday night, my parents held these big parties in our house where they would invite ambassadors and their friends and business partners, and they would play instruments and sing and dance, and and the women were very glamorous. And so I think Iranians generally also love to party. So when the king of Iran was overthrown and alcohol became illegal and co-ed parties were banned, it kind of created this new generation of, I called it the secret rock stars, because everyone, people started building DJ booths and bars and dance floors in the privacy of their homes to keep these parties private. For a country that alcohol is illegal, we are the third consumer of alcohol in the Middle East. So, and because of all these bans, it's very sad. And it is such a young generation. These kids turn into a lot of drugs. I actually there's a chapter in my book called Tehran High, because we are the world's biggest rate of drug addicts in Iran, because there's only so much that you can do in the privacy of home in these parties. And then these kids start getting bored of doing the same thing. So then they turn from alcohol to drugs to find a way to escape and find a different sort of freedom. And it's become such a problem. So, but yes, I used to, as a little girl, watch, my parents and their friends and all these glamorous parties, and just was always fascinated by it.
Can you tell us about the defining event that led to you leaving Iran?
So yes, actually a lot of people think that this event is the reason that I left Iran. But because I was born in the States and my parents wanted me to come to the US when I turned 18 anyways. But when I was 16 years old, my brother and I and my best friend, who was dating my brother's best friend at the time, went to a house party. it was a very normal party, and I've traveled around the world, and I've been to so many parties, and I'll tell you some of the parties that happen in Iran are a lot more wild than they are other parts of the world, and this was just a very normal gathering, 30 people. The girl who threw the party, her father had worked for the old government, and she had a certain last name, and also she wasn't talking to her boyfriend at the time, so in revenge, because he wasn't invited to the party, he called in the government officials, thinking that they were going to shut down the party. So in Iran, when these things happen, usually they stop you. Sometimes you can pay them off. They let you go. Sometimes you get arrested and they take you to a detention center, and then they let you go. But then if you're caught with the wrong government officials, then you can end up with kind of harsh punishment. So he called in the government officials, and I was at the party with my brother and my best friend, and I remember that she just started screaming, "Run!" And I turned around. There was 3 men with guns and khaki pants just running through the house. They had waited outside and waited for someone to come into the party, so they stormed inside the house and started arresting everyone. So I, started running after my friend who was running out the back door. And you're really not supposed to run away from the government officials because they have the right to shoot at you at any time. So next thing you know, I was running through the streets of Tehran in a miniskirt, which is also deemed a criminal act on its own. It's kind of like running through Times Square and screaming, "I have a bomb." So then we were told to stop or they will shoot us. And we were handcuffed, taken by 2 different buses to the Wazara prison. For 5 days, and then we were sentenced to 40 lashes for the girls and 50 lashes for the guys.
So how long after that did you leave?
It was about like 6 months. I was in Iran for a few months. I went on a trip to Dubai. My aunt at the time had a business in Dubai. So my brother wasn't a U.S. citizen, so he couldn't really get a visa to come here. So I went with my brother to Dubai for a little bit, and then I went to Washington, D.C. in the States.
So we're going to move a little forward in time, and you finish high school, and you decide that you're really keen on a career in business, in fashion. And the descriptions in your book are really beautiful. You find out about the fashion districts and the garment districts where you need to go to get fabric, and which warehouses, which countries that you go to if you're wanting to have your designs made. And it's actually really exciting, like the choices you have to make for where do you locate your shop in Washington, and going to New York to the garment district, and even going to areas where the Project Runway is set. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I always, it's funny now, but it wasn't funny when it was happening. I think I have done everything you shouldn't do when you start a business. So a lot of the things that I wrote in my book are my failures and mistakes. But I got to a point that I realized now that all of those things that, the failures that I went through and every step that made me fall, it has gotten me to where I am today. And sometimes the journey takes you to a completely different place that you had intended to go, but you find yourself in even maybe a better place. So when I first started, I was 21 years old and I wanted to start a t-shirt line. I actually made this t-shirt that had 40 cuts on the back of it, which represented the 40 lashes that I had received. And at the time, I thought it was very trendy and cool. And I wanted to kind of tie in the story with the t-shirt, because when I went to Dubai immediately after Iran, is where fashion kind of formed in my head as freedom. I saw a woman wearing a hijab on the same beach as a woman in a bikini. So their freedom of choice empowered me, because I knew that they were doing exactly what they wanted to and standing up for what they believe without the fear of judgment and punishment. So when I decided to create this t-shirt line, I knew what I wanted to do, but I had no idea how to do it. So I just honestly started Googling things, asking people, going to different fabric stores. It got to a point that I couldn't find a factory in the US. So I actually got a job at the airlines because I could travel for free. so that I could use my buddy passes to go internationally to visit factories so that I could start production. And so that first t-shirt line did not work out. And then one day I found myself sitting at the gate at the airport, and I was like, why did I end up here? I don't have a fashion line. It failed, but I'm now working at the airlines. So then I decided that it was hard for me to do the manufacturing, and I thought I was ready to open a boutique. Then, I quote this in my book. My father once told me if partners were good, God would have one. And I chose a really bad business partner. And he said that to me because he had a really bad business partner himself. And at the time when he was saying that, I didn't really understand what he meant, and I thought it was, my dad just being funny. But when I went through it, I completely understood what that meant, with a bad business partner. Choosing the location. When I opened the store, I didn't have any money, so I found myself, I had to do the construction of the store myself with my partner. So, I had to sand down floors, take down the walls, paint. So, again, figuring out all these things had put me, taught me a lot of different things that comes in handy in every day of my business now. So, sometimes as an entrepreneur, you find yourself in places that you don't necessarily want to be, but then you learn so much more about yourself and your business from within, which I think is the best way to experience something.
I think you said that your father was an early inspiration for you in business. Can you tell us a little bit about your father's business ventures?
Yes. So my father, both my parents and their parents were always all entrepreneurs. So I think one of the reasons that I continuously throw myself into things that I start things, I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I'll figure it out, because I saw my parents, like my father first had, he did real estate, and then he went and opened a, leather factory. Which is where I got a lot of inspiration, because as a little girl, I used to go there and watch these factory workers cut the leather and to make them into handbags and suitcases, and I was just fascinated with the process of the manufacturing. But then he went, he had a bad business partner with the leather factory, and after that, he opened a pasta factory because he just felt like that there was need for it, but he didn't necessarily know anything about the food business, and he wanted to try to figure it out. So I think growing up and watching him try all these different things in a way gave me an inspiration to know that it's not the end of the world if it fails. And I think the difference, unfortunately, between my father and I is that he gave up on himself at a certain point, versus I started at a lot younger age, and I didn't have a family to support. So when I felt really hard, it wasn't as hard for me as it was for him. But I definitely grew up watching him make a lot of mistakes, but keep getting back up, and that inspired me to just kind of throw myself into scenarios and figure it out as I go.
I think you said your father, he stayed in Iran, and you came to the United States with your mother, and it was actually your mother who really supported you. Can you tell us a little bit about your mother?
Yes. So my mom is, my inspiration. She's always had, I think she sees a lot of me in herself, and she didn't get to kind of follow her own dreams. And I think she had an entrepreneur father, and she ran her father's business at some point. So she was always a very business oriented woman. But when we decided to come here, I think at the time where I was leaving Iran, my father and I had started to have a really more of our relationship was kind of going south, because I was starting to get really wild, and I wanted to go party and wear these outfits and wear a lot of makeup. And now I realize why my father was so strict. It wasn't because he didn't want me to have the freedom, but it was because he was so scared of the consequences that I was going to face, which was ending behind the bars. And that him and I crashed a lot before I moved. And I mean, I used to fight with him all the time. He'd be like, you can't go out. I mean, I would put makeup on and then take it off. And then one time he found a tissue paper outside the house with lipstick on it. So him and I were crashing on that a lot. So my mom, when she decided to bring me here, because she just wanted to give me better opportunities, and not that my father didn't want to, but my dad was the kind of man who is still to this day, I think he's still hoping for the old Iran to come back. And he has so much pride into what he had established for himself there. So he didn't want to just get up and go to a different country where, because, you know, he's like, this is my home and I don't care who comes and does what. This is always going to be my Iran. And that's the kind of mentality he had. And a really funny thing is that, you know, people around the world do anything to get a green card to come to the U.S. So when, as a U.S. citizen, when I applied for my father, he didn't go to the interview. And he's like, I don't need a green card. And so it's like, really? You don't need a green card? So he's happy where he is, which is great. You know, I think he's hoping for some sort of a change. And my mom is more like me, where she wants to wear a lipstick and go grocery shopping and not have to worry about the consequences. So she spends a lot of time in the U.S. with me and my brother and her siblings, and goes back and forth between my dad and there.
Now, you mentioned about having a not so great first-time business partner, but you struck it really lucky with your financial backer. Can you tell us a little bit about Eric?
Yes, it's funny because the way I have projected Eric in the book is Eric. I met him when I designed that T-shirt that represented the 40 lashes. I was actually 21 years old. I had a friend who was managing money for people who made more than $1 million a year. And Eric was a government contractor who was in DC at the time. So he complimented that T-shirt I was wearing, and he said, did you know, I said, I made it myself. And he's like, are you a designer? I was like, no, but I'm trying to be one. And he's like, well, why are you trying? Why don't you just become a designer? And I was like, well, it's, you know, really expensive, and I don't, you know, have the finances to support it. So he asked me, do you have a business plan? And I said, yes. I didn't, but I said yes. And so I told my friend the next day, and he was like, well, make a business plan. So I spent about 3 weeks at Barnes & Noble's and read all these books on how to create a business plan. I made the world's worst business plan possible. I was like 26 pages of where fashion industry started and, you know, what all those fun facts are. So I stalked him for 3 months, and he finally responded to my email and said, I'm in DC for a business meeting. And I said, I would love to present my business plan to you. So I emailed him, and I invited him to dinner, and I put my business plan out there, and he stopped me after the second page, and he's like, this is the worst business plan I've ever heard in my life. But tell me what you want to do. Forget about the logistics. And I was like, well, the logistics is all I had searched. And so I told him about my story, and I said, this is why I want to start a fashion line, because I want to empower girls who never get the opportunities that I do, because the only difference between me and my friends or the woman in my country is that I held a U.S. passport. So I was able to come and face a lot of possibilities where they don't get to. Not because I am more talented than them or smarter. There are so many beautiful, smart, talented women in my country who will never get the opportunities that I do just because I was born here. And I think he found, you know, he saw my passion, and he said, how much do you need? And I just threw a random number out there. And so he supported my T-shirt line. Completely failed. I think I lost $20,000 in 3 months trying to figure out how to manufacture T-shirts. And so when I wanted to open my boutique, I contacted him back, and I said, look, if you ever want to gain your investment back, your best choice is to invest back in me so that I can make your money back for you. So he was like, the fact that you don't give up gives me a reason to continue to invest. And when I went through the store, even though I had a really bad business partnership, the store opened right in 2008, where Eric's company also struggled financially after the economical crisis in the U.S., so he couldn't come up with the rest of the investment, which I don't really emphasize in the book too much, but it was a fail on both parts. And then when the Miss Universe happened is where I was like, okay, third time is a charm. If you ever want to make your second money and the first one back, this would be the time, which also ended up being not a very good investment, yes.
I think we could all do with an Eric in our life. Do you still keep in contact with Eric?
Yes.
I have to ask this.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
I'm good friends with him and his family, and so we are very good friends. He's invested in one of my best friends' companies as well. He's in IT, so it's much more up their alley than it is in mine. But he's still an investor in my company today.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
The book is very much about how fashion and culture go hand in hand. They just do, don't they?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the origins of Darbidar and what Darbidar means?
So actually, I've changed the company name from Darbadar. It was Darbadar by Tala Raassi, and now it's just Tala Raassi. So Darbadar is a Persian slang. It literally means door to door, but in a slang means that someone that is lost and all over the place. So I felt like when I started the company originally, I felt like it represented me as a designer because I had to go from factory to factory, from country to country, and kind of figuring out my way around. And I was kind of lost in that sense. So I decided to call it Darbadar. And as of 2 years ago, I changed the company name just to Tala Raassi.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Given your personal experience and cultural background, what is your view about the political and public debate that occurs in some countries around the banning of the veil for women?
Personally, I think it's outrageous. I am a Muslim woman, but I'm not a practicing Muslim woman, and I don't consider myself very religious, but I'm a strong believer of freedom is about having the choice to wear what you want, whether it's taking your clothes off or putting more on. So I think, things that happen in France, and I think there was a situation that happened here in Australia. I think it is just as disturbing for people who put me in jail for not wearing enough clothing is for people to ask someone to take their clothing off. If someone wants to wear a certain thing because of their internal faith and that's how they want to present themselves, I think it should be their choice to do so. And I don't think anyone's clothing, as long as it's not harming anyone, should be offensive, or everyone has a freedom of choice, I think.
Fashion is freedom.
Fashion is freedom.
You alluded to the sponsorship experience with the Miss Universe pageant. I think you need to go into more detail.
Yes. So, as a little girl growing up in Iran, I watched the Miss Universe pageant on the illegal satellite TV every year, and I always was really sad that the Iranian woman couldn't attend. But after the 1979 revolution, the new Islamic regime viewed the pageant as a Western culture, and they felt the Iranian woman couldn't attend the pageant because they had to cover themselves, and so they were banned. And my mom always holds on to this, that an Iranian girl from her high school was Miss Universe, I think maybe 40 something years ago. So she talks about it still. So watching that was always very fascinating to me. So when I started my swimsuit line, I had a 5-page spread that came out in Marie Claire that called The Crime of the Miniskirt, which was the story of my original story that I had published about what it was like to get arrested and what it had inspired me to start my swimsuit line. And I was with my publicist, and we were just sitting down, and I got an email on my website from Miss Alabama, and she said, "Hey, I just read your story in Marie Claire, and I would love to wear your bathing suits and talk about your story to inspire the other girls." So I looked at my publicist. I was like, "How cool would it be if I could sponsor the Miss Universe pageant? I mean, could be the Iranian girl who every country would wear a swimsuit that was designed by me, and I can represent my country in a way that it's never been represented." So it was a huge deal for me. She was like, "Let's give it a shot." So we called the Miss Universe pageant immediately after this email, and somebody called us back and said, "It's crazy because on the way to the office today, I ripped up these pages from Marie Claire, and I said, if anyone should design bathing suits for Miss Universe, it should be a woman who has this story of empowerment." So I was like, "What's the catch? Let's do this. It sounds amazing." So the catch was that it was going to cost me $120,000, and I didn't have that kind of money at all in any form of way. So I looked at my publicist. I was like, "Well, this dream was very short lived." And that evening, I couldn't sleep, and just thinking about the possibilities that this could bring to the woman in my country, and the opportunities that would bring for my brand as well and my story. And it was, I just felt like it was a perfect opportunity. So I called Eric, and obviously as usual, he listened, and he's like, okay, what's the catch? So I told him what the catch was, and he laughed for a long time. And then he called me back 30 minutes later, and he said, look, our company has just signed a huge government contract, so let's do it. I think it's a great synergy, and I think this is great. And of course, as soon as he told me, let's do this, I was like, no way I can do this. It's like 2 months away. Like, I completely freaked out. I had a full-time job at a time, running my company at the same time. So long story short, I signed a contract 2 days later with the Miss Universe pageant, and then I had to create 400 bikinis and in 6 weeks, and travel with the pageant for another 6 weeks to Vegas. Unfortunately, it ended up being a very unfortunate situation for us. That empowering idea of the pageant that I had going into it completely vanished the moment that we got to Vegas and got to experience what was happening behind the scenes of the organization. I had to endure a couple of fights with the staff of the Miss Universe, to a point where their vice president threw a drink in my face. It was a very unfortunate situation. We ended up on not very good terms, and I walked away kind of saying, you know what, maybe I'm not that sad that Iranian women are banned from the pageant. And I don't know if it was because at the time it wasn't under Donald Trump or a different organization. I just had a really bad experience, and it was really sad to see that, because there were so many girls who had put so much time and effort to be there, to dream big, and to see them. It was just a very sad situation for me, and I didn't want my company to be, have anything to do with that. And it was very hard to explain that when I wrote the book, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting those girls, and it was more towards the organization and the people that were running the company. So yes, it was a big fail.
How were those women treated? Because you do allude to it, and these women equally came with really high hopes to the Miss Universe pageant, and I felt like a lot of their dreams were also being dashed. Is that right, or?
I wouldn't say that their dreams were. Everyone dreams big. I think it was more for me. I had this completely different, and it could just be me. I had this completely different idea of, these girls that are wearing these crowns and, waving the same way. I'm thinking more like a princess, a super classy scenario where, I grew up thinking that what the pageant was about, talents. And so I meet some of the girls like Jacinta. I loved her. She was smart. She was dedicated. She was cool. She was funny. There were girls like her who were just really genuinely coming for an experience to become a better person. And then you see other girls, like was fitting girls who had just maybe left the surgery room like 3 days before, like that stitches. And so there's two different types of women who attend the pageant for, I think, two different completely reasons. So I think what really disturbed me was the things that they were asked of these women to do. For example, we got close with some of the staff because we were all in the casino living together for 6 weeks. So I made some friends at the organization. So every time they were doing events, they would ask us to go with them. So, for example, we went to this nightclub with, they brought 5 of the girls, and then one of the guy from the organization was like, you and your publicist should come join us. So then I'm sitting there, and these girls are like 18 years old, which in America, your age of drinking is 21. Not that I have a problem with that. I probably started drinking at like 15 myself in the Iranian house party. So I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but like if you are wearing a crown and representing a country in a nightclub, I just didn't see that synergy. So they were asked to like dance on top of the table so that the club could make a video so that they could show it on the night of the pageant to sell the clip. Or, I had picked a few girls to run a runway show for me, and then at the night of the show they had sent different girls, and when I asked why, they said because one of the clients of the casino was in town and they had picked the girls that they wanted to go to dinner with on their website, so they couldn't attend my fashion show. So a lot of things like that, or they would send them to like poker tables to stand there and get chips to come and donate to charity. And I felt like there was more empowering ways to generate money for a charity than putting girls in mini skirts and having them around old rich men. So and I would have probably thought differently if we weren't treated as sponsors so badly. So I think a combination of the mistreatment and the disrespect on their staff and the things that I saw just completely turned me off. And I was happy to not have to continue to work with that.
Was this your one and only time that you met Donald?
Yes. Hopefully the last time.
So the book finishes, and I still had a feeling of, well, what happens next? Because Miss Universe really is just, it's a terrible part of the book,
Yes.
really. So, but you've done amazingly well. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit what happened to Tala afterwards?
So, you know, I always say not everyone that goes through darkness makes it out. And I think right after Miss Universe, you know, even the night of the pageant, I was sitting there and I was like getting all these texts from family and friends. We're so proud of you. We're watching, you know, all these women wearing your swimsuits. And I was just sinking in my chair. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I just lost this huge investment. I might have like taken like $10,000 worth of orders on my website that night, which didn't even cover like my travel expenses with my publicist. And I was like, I have to find a job. Like this is like, I was just in a really, really dark place. And I think in one of the ending chapters of the book, I talk about how as an entrepreneur and also as a woman, I found myself in a lot of times in places where I didn't communicate how I was feeling to other people, even my mother. So no one around me knew what I was feeling. And everyone thought that I was this woman behind this massive empire just because I just did Miss Universe. And here I was having no idea how I was even going to pay for my rent. And I write in this one chapter where I talk about my mom asked me why I look like this, and I just completely blew up on her and like started screaming and left the house with the door open and got in my car and then stopped in the middle of the road. And I was like, what just happened in there? So I went back in, and my mother said nothing. Is that all she said? She's like, your dinner is on the table. She felt my pain, but she didn't. We are the same woman, but lived such a different life. So she knew what I was going through. And at that moment, I was like, I have, you know, two choices: is either to become a 9-to-5 person or is to continue to push forward and at least have a reason to wake up to every day. So I continued after Miss Universe. I took a little bit of a break, worked a little bit more, and, you know, generated some more money and then reinvested that into the swimsuit line and, you know, got it finally out of the hole and made it profitable. And that's where it is today.
Tala, I guess for some of the people here in the audience who may be thinking of going into business themselves, have you got some top tips?
Yes, many, actually. So I'll share a few. I think when I first wanted to go to business was for me originally millions of dollars, being on a cover of Forbes and, you know, becoming this successful entrepreneur or a fashion designer. Today, I think success is about becoming a better version of yourself and knowing that you're not in competition with anybody else. Everyone's timeline is completely different. So just run your own race and try to become a better version of yourself every day. And also don't get scared to try things, because I have failed so many times. I mean, I can't even explain to you. I mean, if you guys read the book, you'll at some point it becomes funny, and sometimes maybe even you'll be like, she's like an idiot. But I had to try things, and I tried them so much, and I've learned so many things. And every door that closed, another door opened. And even with that, I got to meet so many cool people. I mean, if I hadn't done Miss Universe, even though it was such a failure, I wouldn't have met Jacinta, or I wouldn't have met some of these amazing girls, or, you know, people that I met through that, which today they all kind of come full circle. So just because it's not working out right now does not mean it's not going to work. So continue to push forward and only do things that you're passionate about. If you're not passionate about something, it can, because being an entrepreneur is scary. You're essentially creating something from nothing, and most people don't speak your language because they don't understand what you're going through. So only do it if you really, truly love it and believe in it.
Tala, you're known as a famous Persian fashion designer, and you've often said that you'd love to get to a point one day where your clothing line would be for sale in Iran. Has that become a reality, and have you ever gone back to Iran?
So I don't think I can go back now, but I mean I would love to. I miss it every day, and I hope that one day I can go visit. But you know, Iran is becoming a different country than it was when I was growing up there. We recently just opened a Roberto Cavalli store in Iran, and when I was living there, we couldn't even have a McDonald's because they considered it too Western. So I think we're establishing as a country to become a little bit more modern. Hopefully, continue in that path. And yes, it would be a dream for me to have my clothing line sold in Iran.
And I guess going forward, have you got any other great dreams and bold plans?
Yes, so I want to expand my line from swimwear to activewear, but I'm also very passionate. I think this is more of a long-term goal because I haven't figured out how I'm going to get to this yet, but I want to create a documentary on fashion is freedom because throughout my journey, I have met so many different women that fashion means so many different things to them. So for example, I manufacture my swimsuits in Colombia, and the women who manufacture these swimsuits use fashion as a form to pay for their entire village. So what fashion means to them is completely different than what fashion means to someone on a red carpet or someone in Iran like me. So I want to create a documentary of going around the world and kind of explaining what fashion means to people around the world as a form of freedom.
And finally, Tala, I mean, this is part of Brisbane Writers Festival, a great opportunity to discuss ideas, but also books. Any more plans for writing a sequel or even a manual on the what not to do in business?
Well, my friends over there laughing. I always say I should probably write a book about my relationships because that has been a very rocky one as well. So maybe perhaps one on that. But as of right now, I think I want to focus more on establishing my business and expanding on that. But in the future, absolutely. I mean, just writing this book, when I moved to the States, I didn't speak any English. So to write and publish a book in English was a big challenge for me. And I took a Word document and I started typing, and that was just a few years ago. And I know that she can say how many days I cried at the gym and I didn't know what I was doing. So it was a fantastic journey, and I am so happy with what has become. But I think I want to put my focus more on expanding my business at the moment.
On behalf of Logan City Council Libraries, I'd like to thank Tala Raassi for joining us all here today. Could I also remind everyone that you can visit the Logan City Council Libraries website to hear other recordings featuring thought-provoking conversations with inspiring people. Thank you also to our audience for joining us tonight for this special event. Thank you.
Thank you.